by the sound of the baying, by the neighing of the hounds. Diana, Diana, kick your feet up. The spells his teeth and whines, for he's picked up the scent of the crew, and he knows the panic's on.
Chicago, a man who served time in prison for sex crimes was let out. Today they found the bodies of at least 3 young boys buried under his house. He is charged with murder. Here's Jim Cummins.
Police have been watching John Gacy's suburban Chicago home for the past 10 days. They became suspicious when 15-year-old Robert Peast disappeared after he allegedly was last seen with Gacy. This morning, police searched Gacy's home and found the decomposed remains of 3 bodies in a dirt crawl space under the house. They suspect there are several more bodies buried here.
It's suspected because of the looks of the area down in the crawl space. There are some other mounds, and appears to be more there.
Gacy is a 36-year-old building contractor who reportedly dressed like a clown to entertain at children's parties. Prosecutors say he once went to prison for a sex offense in Iowa. At the hearing, police said Gacy has confessed to the Peast murder. He will be examined by a psychiatrist. Meanwhile, investigators have started to dismantle Gacy's house and garage as they continue to search for other bodies in this quiet suburban neighborhood. Jim Cummins, NBC News, Des Plaines, Illinois.
In Marion, Illinois.
Well, have you been able to determine at all how long the bodies have been there?
No, just give me a chance to examine the bones, give me a chance to examine some of the decomposed tissues and so forth. I can't tell reading, I really can't.
Dr. Stein, what is the biggest problem that people are facing in there?
Presently, the biggest problem is to get the remains intact, make sure that we don't have any commingling. In other words, perhaps a couple of bodies together and you mix up the bones to suck my dad's. And really, please understand this. Those poor guys down there are using literally their 10 fingers. Literally using their 10 fingers and trying to exhume the body because there's always the possibility of loss of trace evidence. So you can't use a shovel or something like that.
Are they reassembling the bones before they put them in the bags? Is that your process?
I'm right there. I direct just the way the bones are put into the bags, and fortunately enough, so far we're able to get the complete skeleton and placed into the bags.
Of all 15, you got complete skeletons?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Here's how you feel.
Developments today, we've learned that authorities are being aided in their search for more bodies here at the house on West Somerdale by at least one former employee of Gacy, who they say helped dig the graves.
Police today found 6 more bodies under the John Gacy house in Norwood Park Township near Des Plaines, Illinois. The 6 bodies bring the total found under this house and garage to 15, all appearing to have been teenaged boys and young men. And police, digging cautiously with garden tools, say they've now covered only 1/4 of the space under the house. David?
The mid-air collision in San Diego.
The bodies found today, the condition of the house inside, please.
The number of bodies found today are 6.
Bringing the total to?
21. And the conditions of the bodies are suggested, and really was compatible with, that they were buried at different times.
Different times.
That is correct.
Were they stacked on top of one another or separate?
No, these were separate. They were not stacked one on top of the other at all. One of the bodies also had a ligature or rope around the neck.
Only one of them?
That is correct.
What part of the house again?
Chief?
Well, one of the bodies was recovered in the southeast corner of the house, 2 in the southwest corner of the house, and 3 in the northwest corner.
Chief, what about our other evidence? Belt buckles, buttons, or shoelaces?
We have recovered a belt buckle. I would like to describe it and ask that anyone who would have information on a missing person that might have had that kind of belt buckle call our office at 865-4930.
Is it an unusual belt buckle?
Well, I would consider it unusual, but I'm really not too sure. If I could just describe it, it's a silver rectangular belt buckle. It's 3 1/4 by 2 1/8 inches with an oblong multicolored stone, 1 1/8 by 1 1/2 inches, containing black, brown, and coral stripes. It's an oblong stone in the middle of this belt buckle.
Like a cat's eye?
Similar to a cat's eye. It was on one of the bodies, yes.
So the bodies enclosed today?
No, they were not closed.
Are there any other, we've been talking about the ligatures, the ropes around the necks. Anything else that would suggest violent death to you at this time?
No, nothing different. No, not at all. No. As I mentioned before, and it also goes for today, the bodies are skeletalized, and if there were any soft tissue impringements that suggestive of violence, of course, it would be impossible to determine.
How deep down are you looking now?
Same as before, approximately 3 feet thereabouts, sure.
Chief Don, were you working off of a map, as so many reports have indicated?
We're doing the excavating on the basis of a grid system. And we feel that we're going to have to go over every inch of the basement regardless.
But is there a map, sir?
I'm not going to comment on that.
Approximately what percentage of the basement have you covered so far?
Oh, I would say possibly over a half.
Okay, and the number of bodies versus the area you've covered so far, how many logically does it come out to for the whole thing? Does it seem like we're keeping into the framework of 32 bodies, or does it seem...
I don't think that we can look at this logically. We'll just have to keep searching.
In other words, you're just going to dig until you cover that whole basement area?
Until we're satisfied or no.
Will you be looking under the driveway here and also in the backyard, in the workshed area some more?
That's a possibility. I can't rule it out.
We understand, Chief, that you're looking at other places where Gacy might have worked over the years, even at one of his locations in another state.
Well, I can't comment on that because, as I mentioned before, I haven't been out of this house since Friday, and I'm really not up to date on other aspects of the investigation.
Would it appear from what you have seen today, gentlemen, that the search is almost at an end?
That's kind of difficult to say.
Given the amount of territory that you've covered and the amount left to cover?
I would hope so, but there's just no way of telling at this point in time because we have uncovered bodies where there's no indication that there'd be a body there. And only by digging, the men come up with the remains. So we'll have to continue.
Yes.
How soon are you to identifying any of the bodies?
We shall begin tomorrow. We have, that's right, the dental records are coming now to my office, and we shall try to begin tomorrow.
If you make a positive ID of a body, will you will they drop charges at Des Plaines and just charge them at the county level?
Sir, I'm not an attorney. I cannot answer the question. I don't know.
This is for the chief.
Surely.
That's going to have to be determined by the state's attorney's office. They're going to be doing the prosecution of this case. And, I'm sure they're going to attempt to go for the best case. No, I haven't.
Chief, could we get a shot of the belt buckle, maybe to put it on the air? Somebody
I know, and I had thought about it, except that I'm somewhat concerned. Most people with missing children are having their eyes glued to TV, and I just don't want to shock some poor mother. I think I'd like to make the buckle available for newspaper pictures, but I'd also like to wait and see if we get a response to the description. If we can do it that way, we can make an identification. I just don't want to shock someone.
Chief, when can we get a picture of that? I'm from the Tribune.
Well, at such time as I don't get any replies.
Oh, I see. You can wait a little bit.
Right, because if we could get some information, and I think it's better.
Thank you very much.
The latest horrible news is 6 bodies exhumed. This makes it a total now of 27.
The condition of the bodies?
6 skeletalized, 1 well preserved.
Any marks of violence?
I can't see any marks of violence.
Any clothing at all?
Yes, had some clothing on, yes.
He reportedly said 27 were buried in here. Do you think you have reached the limit?
I don't know who you mean by he.
Mr. Gacy reportedly said this.
I know nothing about it. It's hearsay.
Are there any
All that I can tell you is what I have seen, what I've examined. I examined 27 dead human beings.
How about the one that was well preserved? Any guess on how long he's been dead?
No, I will not venture a guess until I have thoroughly examined the remains.
Is there any evidence of any further remains under the house?
I believe there is some evidence. And I'm basing that, of course, upon the fact that some of the terrain there is soft, muddy, and that's about it.
How much more of the house do you have to search?
Well, I believe the chief could answer that.
Dobbs, how far, how much do you have to go yet?
I would say we're going to be making an examination of at least the last quarter of the premises, the crawl space.
Digging as usual through the trench system? Will you work tomorrow? Trench system?
Yes, we'll be back tomorrow.
What about Sunday and Monday?
Yes.
House will be secured. We'll be back on Tuesday if necessary.
Dr. Stein, how are you coming with the identification process?
We will start the identification tomorrow morning.
Meaning what, sir?
Strictly dental identification. Tuesday, I'll have a conference with my anthropologist, and we will do some work on bones. Then also we will x-ray the remains.
Any idea when you'll have anything definitive to report?
I do not know at all.
The body
If
found.
I have it, the people certainly would know about it.
The body found in the Des Plaines River last night. There was a report that there was a positive identification on that. You're waiting to release that. Do you have an identification of that?
This is an entirely different jurisdiction. I know nothing about the remains in the river or the findings. So I can't answer
The well-preserved body that you found, was that of a young boy?
I don't know if it's a young boy or not, but let's say it was not an old person.
Were you trying to identify him with pictures you had taken elsewhere, or someone had taken?
Oh, I don't think you could. No, you cannot, no.
Chief Dobbs, has there been any response on this belt buckle evidence you found?
Not to my knowledge. I've been in touch with my North Investigation section, and they haven't received any. They've received a few calls, but nothing that we can tie together.
Sheriff Elrod, do you have any response to the limited gag order that was set forth in court today in Des Plaines?
We've been maintaining what you might call a limited gag order. We are not saying anything that we're not sure of, and we're trying to preserve the crime scene, and we're turning over all the evidence that we have to the medical examiner and to the state's attorney.
Sheriff Elrod, are you now convinced that Gacy had no accomplices?
I'm not convinced of anything. We're continuing our investigation.
Thank you, gentlemen.
How many people have called about inquiring about missing persons to the sheriff's office?
Innumerable persons have called from throughout the world, I might add, and unless we get some type of dental identification or some other further identification, it's very difficult, but we were referring these matters to Dr. Stein, to the medical examiner.
Dr. Stein, you don't have any objection to Mr. Amirani?
Yes.
Terry, the grisly scene you are seeing right now, this is the second body. Dr. Stein just told us the shocking news, 6 more bodies found in the John Gacy home. Sheriff's deputies are loading the body in now, taking the stretcher out to go in to retrieve more inside. This brings to the total count here at the house and garage of 27 bodies. This does not count the bodies found in rivers and forest preserves elsewhere. Sheriff Richard Elrod was also here with Dr. Stein, and now you see another body being brought out to be taken away. Total count now 27 bodies at the home of John Wayne Gacy. That's the situation from the Summerdale address. They are going to work, Jay, tomorrow. The workers will have Sunday and Monday off for the holidays, gratefully for them. And they believe that there is about 25% more of the house area, the search area, that they still have not gone into. So this count may well go over the 27 that John Gacy reportedly said were buried here. Dr. Stein says that today's findings included 5 skeletal remains and 1 body that was in a fairly good state of condition for identification. He also said that identification of the bodies will begin tomorrow with the full check of dental charts and whatever else they have to work with in this grisly task.
man who liked to put on a clown suit and entertain children. Now he is charged with one murder, and the police have found, at last count, 27 bodies buried under his house and garage, and 2 more in a nearby river, while Gacy is in a hospital bed, tied down. Here's Jim Cummins.
John Wayne Gacy was also Pogo the Clown, who loved to make kids laugh. He was married twice, divorced twice, and had 2 children. A Democratic Party precinct worker with political connections. A modestly successful building contractor. His neighbors knew him as Johnny, the life of the party.
He was a very good neighbor, and we socialized with him.
Carol Samankowitz was once Gacy's housekeeper and had a couple of dates with him.
You didn't expect it from him. He was a nice guy.
This is the other John Gacy, in leather restraints at a jail hospital, charged with 1 murder, the suspect in at least 28 others. One of John Gacy's neighbors said, "All of this is like a nightmare, and it will be several years before this neighborhood recovers from that nightmare." Gacy's home has become a tourist attraction. Every day for a week, outsiders came here to see bodies brought out of Gacy's house. His neighbors will never forget that.
You see bodies in your sleep, you see him in your sleep. It's just too much.
Today, a young man named Jeff Rignall filed a criminal complaint alleging Gacy raped him, and Rignall suggested Gacy may have had an accomplice. The crowds stayed away from Gacy's house today because police said they think they found all the bodies in the house. They plan to search the yard when the sub-zero weather breaks. That's when they also plan to resume dragging this river, where they found 2 bodies so far and expect to find 3 more. Jim Cummins, NBC News, Norwood Park, Illinois.
The United...
Mr. Grex, what... Oh, wait a minute. That's probably going to... Put your hand down.
This guy on the phone.
No, we'll see.
She could put him in the back bedroom. There's a phone back there, too.
Okay. Okay, we'll try. What kind of man was Mr. Gacy? What kind of a man? How would you characterize him?
Oh, I don't know. I characterize him. I thought he was a pretty fine person. Very good. Very. Very amiable. I liked him. Even now, I like him. I feel sorry for him that this has happened, but he's been a wonderful person, a very generous person to us.
Now, what kind of a neighbor was he?
Very good neighbor. If there was a case that I needed to borrow a tool from the man because he had many good tools, he was more than willing to let me have anything I wanted, anything.
Now, of course, we know that the problem here is the story of these bizarre occurrences, murders right next door to your home. Did you ever hear anything that would indicate to you that there was foul play going on over there?
Never a sound, not a sound, never. Not even, like they've asked about screaming or anything, never a sound out of that house. It's always been a quiet house.
Never any noise or anything?
No, other than maybe doing some construction work at night, outside, a little loudness that way, sawing and things like that, but I attribute that to his work.
Let me ask you something else. You said about he seemed to have odd hours. Would you explain to me what kinds of things you heard going on at night or whatever?
Well, it would be basically loading his vehicles. His trucks were coming constantly, and at all hours of the night they would come in. That might be strange, but I attribute that to work. His remodeling, sometimes they'd load a truck up at 1, 2 in the morning, and then off it would go. I never knew where it went to, but the lads got in the truck and took it away. Or they would come back with material.
These were young men coming back and forth?
They were always young men that he had working for him.
Now, did you ever have any indication that there was any kind of foul play going on? He was supposedly a homosexual. Was there any indication of that?
No, there never was anything. I only had my own suspicions of why he was always surrounded by so many young people. Always young males. Never older persons, always young people.
Did you ever talk to him about this late night activity, that kind of thing?
Only at night if they got too carried away and would get a little too noisy. I've gotten up at 1:30 and 2 in the morning, and when he was sawing out there, and I would ask him to cease it, and he said, "Sorry, Ed." He says, "I'll stop right away." Because I had to get up for work the next day. I said, "John, that's annoying to have you sawing with a power saw out in the garage at 1, 2 in the morning." And he'd done that on a number of occasions.
How do you feel now, thinking back on those incidents, that noise late at night, and then knowing what you know now about these murders?
Well, now I kind of see some of the stuff that was going on. It probably was something pertaining to what he was doing. A number of times he'd come home with his car now at night, at odd hours of the night. He had a big old street lamp that he installed up in front, and that was quite bright. He'd go in the house, shut the light off, and then he went to his olds, and he seemed to be struggling. I never seen what, but he'd be with the door open for 15 minutes. I thought, well, why the hell don't he just take the thing in, and that was it. But he'd be there, and finally I'd give up watching and go in the house, and the door was closed. But it's hard to tell what he was struggling with. But he seemed to have a problem getting in. Then later on, the light would come on the outside. And then it'd be 2 or 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning. He'd go back out there, jump in the car, and off he'd go again. Those were the hours that he carried on. But I thought it was business. But it probably was some of this foul play, maybe bringing some of these young people in.
Do you think he could have been carrying bodies in and out of there?
A few times the trunk was open. He could swing in because of a circular driveway to his house, and that also, the light was always his habit. He flopped the light off, switched the light off that had on the outside, and a little while the trunk would open, and it was the same thing. He was in there digging around. What he was removing I never seen, but then eventually the trunk would get closed, and he'd close it, go in the house, or retire after that, or he'd take off. His lights were on all hours of the night, or all night long they'd be on.
Was there a lot of noise in the house with other people, anything like that?
No. I had a habit of, I didn't like his friends, and I had a younger son that kind of associated with some of his lads, and one time I got a retired daughter that woke up, Dad, and she says, Ronnie's got a friend in the house. And it was one of his employees, and I'd get a hold of Ronnie. I says, take that guy and get him out of here. 3 o'clock in the morning, you're not going to bring no friend into the house. And I'd put them both out. My son said, if he goes, I go. I says, then you go too with him. They spent a night in the house. And I went there the following night, and I told John, I caught this one kid. I said, if I ever catch you in the house, I says, I'll break your neck for you. Because I just don't like him in here. Not 3 in the morning. And John says, you stay out of Eddie's house. Even if Ronnie calls you in there, you have no business in there. Because I've had a number of articles vanish in the house, and we have no idea where they went. I lost a $1,000 diamond ring. I got no idea where it went to. It could have been some of his weird friends that Ron would bring in there. It was pretty scrubby and scurvy as far as I was concerned. Yes, John's. The pool was above ground.
It was an above ground pool?
Above ground pool, and he sold the thing because he had no use for the pool, and some other person bought it, and there never was anything. There was a little depression in it, but he just leveled it off with dirt, and there was grass put on it. At that time, this was right after he moved, a year or so after that he moved in there. But if they're to do any hunting, my best bet is that he should be, they should look under the garage floor. This was laid on the lawn. Hardly any gravel other than the roughness that was in there. What was on the pool in this area, he took that and threw that in the back there. But there he had the habit of poking around in the evening, too. Whether digging, back by the where the garage is, underneath that now. But that was pretty quick. And I'm suspicious also of where he has that major barbecue pit in there. That I came home that one day and he had a hell of a hole dug in there. And that was before pouring concrete, and I never did see the finishing. Lift that up for us. I suppose we should have cleared the clothes out, but my son says he's left. Those are most of his things in here. And here comes the spade. I don't know if you want him in here. That's Peanut. And go, Ed. Pardon? Open the door. To the bottom of the floor height. Which would you prefer?
The bottom of it, I guess.
The bottom of it is 39 inches. That's the depth for the crawl space.
Put it in dead center.
This will show it deeper, of course. Because the floor height, I think, is about 52 inches.
Okay.
So, I contend that he must have been busy filling it with something. Because there is an awful lot of room.
It would have been about 30 inches till you'd hit the...
40 inches.
40 inches.
40 inches to the bottom of the rafter. These are 2x10 rafters. This is the lowest point, is that steel beam which supports the entire length of the house. The rafters are all... You're running. The insurance company had it cost $14,000. It doesn't cost $30,000. We built it for $28,000. They burned these walls down. All this area to half of the kitchen.
You're an automatic, John, so you got light, Iris.
And one day, all I did was flip the toggle switch on the furnace, went to storm, come back down the street, and they set the rafters on fire and burned the walls in the bathroom. Oh, no. Half an hour. When I ran back in the house to cut the power, the firemen were right behind the street.
The search for victims of John Wayne Gacy may be shifted to the basement of this building on Chicago's near north side. A carpenter has told authorities that when Gacy's contracting company remodeled the basement in 1976, it had a bad smell, which Gacy blamed on dead rats. The subcontractor also claimed that Gacy worked at night in the basement, pouring concrete. So far, the 28 bodies attributed to Gacy were found exactly where Gacy told authorities to look, in the crawl space of his suburban home or in a nearby river. There has been no mention till now of any other location. In court on Tuesday, a Gacy victim who lived. Jeff Rignall claims to have been chloroformed and raped by Gacy. Rignall wants the charges against Gacy changed from misdemeanor to felony. Rignall claims that when he first complained of Gacy's sexual attack on him, police treated it as a joke. Rignall's complaint was last May. Since then, at least one more youth, Robert Peast, has disappeared. And though Robert Peast's body has not been identified among the 28 Gacy victims in the Cook County morgue, it is the Peast murder with which Gacy is charged. Matt Quinn, ABC News, Chicago.
In Rockford, Illinois today, jury selection begins for a mass murder trial that will actually be conducted in Chicago. It's been more than a year since the murders were discovered, but Chris Kelly reports emotion in the case remains high.
You might be witnessing one of the most horrible crimes, perhaps, in a century.
It was a grisly scene. Day after day, the bodies of boys and young men being taken out of the home of John Wayne Gacy. 29 decomposed corpses were found under the house and surrounding grounds. 4 other bodies were discovered in a river several miles away. In all, Gacy is charged with 33 murders over a 7-year period. More than a year later, 11 victims remain unidentified. Authorities claim the 37-year-old building contractor used job offers and sometimes strong-arm methods to bring his young male victims to his home for intended homosexual activities. Most were killed, a few escaped.
Definitely threatened me with that he had guns in the house, and that if he had to, if I went to the police or told anyone about his advances upon me, that I would be endangered with that, and that he wanted me to realize how easy it would have been for him to kill me right then and there.
Police searched the home for several months looking for other victims. The house was so badly dismantled that it had to be torn down. Gacy has pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. During 3 of his pretrial court appearances, he collapsed and was hospitalized for apparent heart problems. But doctors have been unable to find any health problems serious enough to prevent him from standing trial. Among those the defense would like to call as potential witnesses is Rosalind Carter, who posed with Gacy for this 1976 photograph. At the time, Gacy was a Democratic volunteer campaign worker. Because of the enormous publicity generated by the case, the jury will be selected in Rockford, 90 miles away from Chicago. The city was picked because a study showed that of 5 potential sites, people here had been subjected to the least number of news accounts of the case.
I think Rockford is a good common sense community. People don't have a tendency to run in a pack in Rockford. I think most of the people here are independent enough to form their own opinions. And I think that probably a sense of fairness pervades that kind of thinking.
The selection of the jury here in this Rockford courtroom and the subsequent trial itself in Chicago represent an unprecedented legal procedure in Illinois. The hope is that this, along with sequestering the jury, will assure Gacy a fair trial. Chris Kelly, CBS News, Rockford, Illinois.
The John Gacy mass murder trial is nearing an end. Norma Quarles has details.
Summed up its case against John Wayne Gacy, accused of killing 33 young men. Prosecutor Terry Sullivan called Gacy's insanity defense hogwash. In his confession, Gacy admitted killing the young men after having sex with them, then burying most of the bodies under his house. The prosecutor called Gacy a vile, evil, diabolical murderer who must be held responsible for his acts. Gacy chuckled. The photos of the 22 identified victims were displayed. Murder, Sullivan said as he pointed to each one. Murder. Relatives of the victims wept. Sullivan told the jury that justice implores them to find Gacy guilty of murder in the worst degree. The defense argument is that no one could kill so many people, bury them under his own home, and be sane. After final arguments are concluded, the judge will charge the jury, and the jury will begin deliberating the fate of John Wayne Gacy. Norma Quarles, NBC News, Chicago.
In Miami, investigators have begun working on a
John Wayne
case
Gacy was found guilty today in Chicago of the murder of 33 young men and boys, all of whom he either induced or forced to have sexual relations with him. He buried most of the bodies under his house and got rid of the others elsewhere. Norma Quarles reports.
It took the jury of 7 men and 5 women less than 2 hours to find John Wayne Gacy guilty of murdering 33 young men. Gacy was convicted of murdering more people than anyone else in U.S. history. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read. Gacy, a building contractor, was arrested in December 1978 in connection with the disappearance of a 15-year-old boy. Later that month, police began uncovering bodies from a crawl space under Gacy's suburban Chicago home. 29 bodies were eventually found on Gacy's property, 4 others found in a nearby river. Gacy had confessed to the killings, but his lawyers claimed he was insane. Gacy said he has 4 personalities. Families of the victims wept when the verdict was read. I spoke to Mrs. Eugenia Gotzik, mother of 17-year-old Gregory.
I can't help it. I cry all the time because I'm happy that they convicted him. I hope he does get the electric chair. Then it'll make everybody feel better. I'm sure it'll make the other mothers feel better, too.
There will now be another hearing, and this same jury will begin deliberating once again. This time, they will deliberate on whether John Wayne Gacy should be put to death in the electric chair. Norma Quarles, NBC News, Chicago.
There's more trouble these days for women whose mothers took the synthetic...
In Chicago, the jury in the Gacy mass murder trial will decide a sentence today after finding Gacy guilty of murder. Norma Quarles reports.
John Wayne Gacy was called the worst of all murderers by the prosecutor, a man responsible for enough misery to last a century. It took the jury less than 2 hours to reject the defense argument that Gacy was insane and to find Gacy guilty of murdering 33 young men during a 7-year killing spree. Gacy showed absolutely no emotion as all the murder counts were read, but he winked before he left the courtroom. Gacy's killings, which began in January 1972, ended in December 1978, when police discovered dozens of bodies buried in makeshift graves under his suburban Chicago home. Gacy admitted luring the young boys to his home with promises of drugs, liquor, or construction jobs, then forcing them to have sex with him before killing them. Prosecutor William Kunkel had told the jury not to show sympathy, only justice.
What I suggested to them was that if they allowed that man, John Gacy, to walk the earth, then indeed God help us all.
It was an emotional time for relatives of the victims, and many like Ken Peast, whose brother was killed, want revenge.
There's only one solution now. What is that? I want him to see him go to the chair.
And Eugenia Gotzik, mother of another victim, tearfully agreed.
I hope he does get the electric chair. Then it'll make everybody feel better. I'm sure it'll make the other mothers feel better, too.
And now the same jury that found Gacy guilty will decide whether he should be sentenced to die in the electric chair. Norma Quarles, NBC News, Chicago.
A mass killer who has been in jail for 15 years faces execution next May. In Illinois, a date has been set for John Wayne Gacy's death on Friday. Gacy was arrested in 1978 and convicted in the sex slayings of 33 young men and boys. The U.S. Supreme Court rejected what is seen as the last viable appeal last October. Fire has destroyed part of the fairgrounds in New Orleans.
Extra, the man who committed what may be the crime of the century. His name is John Wayne Gacy, convicted of killing 33 innocent people and destroying hundreds of lives. He's never talked to anyone about the case until tonight. His murder spree was first discovered on a cold December day when the first of his victims were found in the crawl space beneath his home. They were taken out one by one as the world watched. For 13 years, Gacy refused to talk. But tonight, he's breaking that silence, walking out from death row in Menard State Prison to speak one-on-one with Channel 2's Walter Jacobson. Walter is here now to tell us what Gacy had to say in an exclusive interview. Walter.
Quite a bit. Well, I spent 2.5 hours with John Gacy listening to a whole new story about his case. He was rambling and often inconsistent, but always very cagey. 13 years ago, he told the police how he murdered his victims. Now he's telling me he never did.
People don't want to know the truth and the honesty of it. If they want to be convinced or brainwashed into what they believe, then fine, then go ahead and kill me. But vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, because you will have executed somebody that didn't commit the crime.
Those are the words of John Wayne Gacy, pleading innocence from death row at Menard State Penitentiary 13 years after being convicted of his crimes. The most notorious serial killer of our time.
When they paint the image that I was this monster who picked up like these altar boys along the street and swatted them like flies, I said, this is ludicrous.
But the jury didn't find it ludicrous. After barely 2 hours deliberation, its verdict was murder by Gacy, 33 times. 29 bodies buried in that house of his on Summerdale, a crime of horrendous proportions. In the crawl space underneath, bodies covered with lime and encased in plastic, dug up a few days before Christmas and carried into the December cold, one after another after another. But despite all this evidence, he says he has proof he didn't do it. Here's one of dozens of examples of what he calls proof.
I've taken 3.5 hours of truth serum. And under sodium amytal, the maximum amount that I could have, it shows that I have no knowledge of the crime whatsoever. Never have had.
But this is where his attempt to change history, which is what he thinks will get him a new trial, begins to break down. There is no proof anywhere that he ever took truth serum. Now, it's not only a matter of physical evidence, it's a character issue as well. Many times during our interview, he tried to portray himself as a good guy, an ethical, hard-working family man. Here's how he describes himself as a father.
Loving and caring. I've always looked after my children, even now.
What kind of values you remember imparting to them?
The kind of values?
Were you strict with them too?
No, not as strict as, no. A lot of things that my dad did, I refused to do, because I don't believe in hitting children. I don't believe in spoiling a child either. My values are such that if you give enough love to a
You're
children...
accused of murdering 33 kids, and you say you didn't believe in hitting. I mean...
Well, anybody that knows... You see, first of all, you're basing this garbage on what you've heard of me.
And what the jury said, and what the courts of appeal have said. And the prosecutor who put him in jail says Gacy is a ruthless and sadistic killing machine.
He's responsible. He knew exactly what he was doing. He planned it in advance. He carried it out, and he enjoyed it.
And he admitted it. In fact, boasted of it to the police. But now, 14 years later, he's denying it and talking to me about it. What does Prosecutor Kunkel think of that?
He's a desperate man. He's going to die in 2 or 3 years. He's going to be executed when the law is finally carried out. And he'll clutch at any straw.
2.5 hours of clutching at straws, cunning and manipulative denials. But if you listen carefully, you catch him slipping up. About John Vukovich, for instance, his second victim.
What happened to, what happened in the Vukovich case? Where was he picked up, and how did he get to the house, and what happened with him?
I don't want to go into the other, the 5 that I know about. Just take it that I didn't. Vukovich is not one that I killed, so I don't know nothing about him. The little bit that I know about him is that he was an employee of mine. See, when you look about this recall business, and
I'm not a prosecutor, John, but you just
I know you're not. Wait a minute.
Is not one that you killed, which suggests that maybe in fact there were others that you did kill. No, no.
Okay, I'm sorry if I led you to believe. No, strike it then. That is wrong.
But it's too late to strike it. There are others he killed, children he lured into his home anyway who didn't get out alive. When he was arrested, he told the police what he did and how he did it.
with a rope that he used as a tourniquet. Now he says he didn't do it, and shows me his rope trick to explain how the police misunderstood. That and more of what he's twisting into his pleas of innocence tomorrow. Linda?
13 years ago, a jury deliberated for just 2 hours before finding John Wayne Gacy guilty of murdering 33 young men and boys. The evidence seemed clear. Gacy went to death row. But tonight in News Extra, a Channel 2 exclusive, John Gacy speaks out, claiming that he is a victim of circumstance. And he sets out to try to prove it to Channel 2's Walter Jacobson. Walter?
Linda, Gacy is, as you noted, I think quite accurately a minute ago, a man who was found guilty of all those murders and of being plenty sane enough to have committed them very quickly. The jury acted in fewer than 2 hours. There were half a dozen pieces of evidence that were just overwhelming. But Gacy now says that he refutes that evidence. And all he's owning up to is having some knowledge of just 5 of the murders and direct knowledge of even fewer than that.
If you want to charge me with anything, charge me with complicity in 2 of the murders.
Just 2?
That's all I know about.
That's his story, that he didn't kill anyone. Just an accomplice, he says, and that he helped dispose of 2. One of them, Robert Peast, who was 15 years old when he went to the house on Summerdale. Gacy owned a construction company and invited young Peast to apply for a job.
Robert Peast was killed by another individual in my home.
How did he get to your home?
He was transported to the house by another.
How did the other, whoever he was, kill Robert Peast?
I believe he was strangled.
You were there, right?
Not during the crime, but I was there afterwards, and I watched the removal of the body.
And what happened to the body afterwards? Was one that was... That body was put into the river.
It was taken to the river and dumped in the river.
Did you help do that?
Yes, I'm in complicity with that. I've always contended. Don't look at me as an innocent babe of the woods.
Not for a second would I look at John Gacy as a babe in the woods. He may be admitting now only to being an accomplice. But 13 years ago, when he was arrested, he confessed to almost everything. You have all the bodies, Gacy said, and there was even a killer map showing where 27 youths were buried. And in fact, he led police to his garage and sprayed orange paint on the concrete to mark the spot precisely where a body was found.
No.
Now, he says, he was simply marking a spot where some new concrete had been poured.
In regards to going out into the garage, yes, I know I went to the house, and yes, I know I walked in the garage, and they asked me where the last section of concrete was poured. Okay. I said, there's the last section where the last section of concrete was poured. Okay. They are the ones that took the orange can of paint and said, here, put a mark there, so I put an X there.
So the paint was not to identify the place of burial?
No, it never was. They asked me.
But according to authorities who were with Gacy that morning, he made more than just an X on the floor.
He sprayed a stick figure with the orange spray can in the garage. Not just a mark, a stick figure showing the orientation of the body. Right underneath that stick figure, exactly where he drew it, pointed in the direction he drew it, was the body of John Butkovich.
And then there's the Gacy confession about how he killed his victims. Strangled them with his now infamous rope trick that police say he demonstrated to them with a rosary bead. He says he was simply discussing knots in general. Catch his sense of humor.
Shoelaces, huh? You're in trouble now. Aren't you afraid sitting that close to me? What the hell? Oh, this is too long. You don't need it this long. Okay. I had a rosary, which I carried in my pocket. I've always carried a rosary. It was my communion rosary. They said, well, what kind of a knot do you use? I said, what do you mean knot? When I tie things up, I says, depending on what I'm using it for, I said, the only thing I ever learned from Boy Scouts is a tourniquet knot. He said, well, show us what that is. So I took, at that time, and again, it's together, but in order to demonstrate it here, I took the rosary and I said, well, here, you put it around. This is hard trying to do this. Why don't you put your hand out? Okay, here. What I told him, I said, here, all you do is you wrap it around, you put one knot in it. And I said, then you put a second knot in it. Okay? Mm-hmm. I said, then you take a stick and stick it in here, and you just turn this. And I said, it causes a tourniquet. I said, that's the only knot I ever learned.
Precisely the kind of knot found on the ropes wrapped around the necks of the victims found under the house on Summerdale. And there was other compelling evidence, including wallets and rings of the victims found in Gacy's home, that leave no doubt whatever he was the killer. But what is it that made him do what he did? A look at the mind of a serial killer
Tonight
tomorrow.
on News Extra, a portrait of a killer, paintings and diaries that provide a frightening view inside the mind of the worst mass killer in American history, John Wayne Gacy. Tonight, Gacy talks exclusively to our Walter Jacobson and reveals a part of his life that most of us have never seen. Walter?
Linda, there are personality traits that are common to mass killers, including arrogance and cunning, and enough cleverness to kill many times without getting caught. John Gacy has all those traits, and then some. He was a Kentucky colonel, and a husband and a father of 5 children, and an actor dressed as a clown. John Gacy loves clowns.
To me, clowning it was a way of relaxation for me. You regressed into childhood, you were able to relax, and you could be goofy if you wanted to, and still you had the facade of your face being covered.
The clown suit hid his face and his evil crimes as well. Even today, on death row, he's painting portraits of himself as a clown. The 33 Flavors clown, and the convicted killer of 33 can't help but chuckle at the irony.
I used to do clowning, and I don't know if you want to mention the name, for an ice cream company in Chicago, who had 33 flavors. I used to, I'm serious, Bressler Ice Cream Company. I was their contractor, and I was also their clown. And Pogo the Clown was the clowning that I did for charity hospital work for the Democratic Party, and Pogo the Clown is originally. Pogo comes from being Polish and on the go all the time, so it's Pogo.
On the go for Democrats as Norwood Park committeeman. A visit with Rosalind Carter, the First Lady during the Carter administration. Gacy right here is hiding the fact that there are bodies buried under his house. He's the great deceiver.
I always felt that service community and community service to others, you know, in my religious background, I felt if you serve other people, it'll come back to serve you. You know, I've always believed that way with generosity.
So if he looks for good and he's generous, why'd he kill 33 people? Nobody knows, but the psychiatrists talk about how obsessive and meticulous he is, enough to kill repeatedly and to stack his victims in a careful and ordered manner, like cordwood under his house. Even now, he's obsessed and meticulous with his life. What's your life like?
Day to day? I live it day to day.
What do you mean?
If you want to know what my life is like, I log it every day. For the last 12 years, all you got to do is ask. I can tell you everything. I can tell you it's the first meal they served me here because I do it daily.
What do you do all day?
Every phone call, everything that I do, every time an officer's around me is logged. Every movement that I make is in the book here.
And he and his lawyers have a log on his victims, too. Everything they did before they were killed.
You know, when I tell you I've got background information on it, we took each one of them by, we took each one of the victims, and this is by their names or by their indictment numbers. And what we did with each one of them, we did profile sheets on them. We wanted to know what this kid was into, what his background was.
Chicago psychiatrist Daniel Johanna of Northwestern University spent a few hours this week screening the interview.
He's very attentive to all details, and so he's sort of, that's the way that he operates. And that's how people like him are able to do these crimes and cover them up, because they are well planned and organized.
One thing John Wayne Gacy could not plan was the way he got that way.
My dad was domineering in fact. He had a different set of values, but also very stern individual. My dad drank a lot, and when he drank a lot, yeah, he was abusive to my mother and to me, but I never swung at my dad because I loved him for what he stood for.
Maybe that's where it began to go wrong for John Gacy. He doesn't know, nor does he seem to care. He loses himself in his paintings. Why the skeleton?
This was done by request. Somebody requested a skull clown, and mostly the punk rockers and the undergrounders like that stuff there. This is Christ as I see him in myself. And it's monolithic because Christ, to me, is monolithic. He's all things to all people. This here is the Hi-Ho series, and that is self-explanatory. It's the Seven Dwarfs, And they've always stuck to me as a great child painting. And so I've done a series of Hi-Ho series paintings. And this is the 1990 one. This is called Hi-Ho Around the Campfire. It's an original work. Walt Disney is a mentor for me because I've always enjoyed his creativity. And the seven dwarfs, if you actually look at all the faces, they represent the seven different moods that most people can get into.
Moods are important to John Gacy. He has so many of them himself. Angry ones mostly toward his father and his victims, and especially, it seems, toward the victims' families, who are constantly reminding him of his crimes.
That one mother that gets on television all the time who thinks I should be given 33 injections, I think she ought to take 33 Valiums and go lay down. She goes on Geraldo show and all these other shows talking about, I think it's Maori, I think is the name. Her Marine son. Her Marine son, if her Marine son was so great, what the hell did he run away from home 12 times?
As callous and as cunning as he is, John Wayne Gacy talks about his victims tomorrow at 10.
33 times. 33 families forever changed. Tonight in News Extra, the victims of John Wayne Gacy. For the first time, Gacy is speaking out about the young men who died and the loved ones they left behind. And as you know, he is talking exclusively to Channel 2's Walter Jacobson. Walter?
Linda, John Gacy talks about his victims like so many numbers on a scorecard. He seems to have no feelings whatever about them as human beings. But look at this, and you see 33 children who lived and loved and were loved. John Vukovich was 18. Michael Bonin was 17. Randall Reffitt, 15. Why them? There's no logical explanation for why them, any of them. Several were runaways from broken homes 14 years ago when John Gacy was preying on families that split apart. Today, in his arrogance, he lectures them.
And nowadays, do you realize by 1993 that 50% of the American families will be single-parented? And that shows a breakdown in the church and not being able to hold families together. And for this reason, children run away from home and seek love in other places.
And wind up in trouble. That's Gacy's view of things. Kids get in trouble because nobody cares about them. Gacy got in trouble when, after 32 victims, he strangled Robert Peast, an all-American, clean-cut local kid whose disappearance attracted police. Such carelessness is typical of a serial killer.
By the time they've committed 10 or 12, they are very, very laid back. By the time they commit 20, 15 or 20, they start getting careless, cavalier.
If it sounds familiar, it's because you've heard the experts say it about Jeffrey Dahmer. Gacy dislikes the comparison.
What do I think of Jeffrey Dahmer? I don't know the man personally, but I'll tell you this. That's a good example as to why insanity doesn't belong in the courtroom. Because if Jeffrey Dahmer doesn't meet the requirements for insanity, then I'd hate like hell to run into the guy that does.
Do you feel
Beyond that, I have no comment on Jeffrey Dahmer because I'm not Jeffrey Dahmer. And I would not, whether it's Berkowitz, whether it's Bundy, whether it's Williams, Wayne Williams down in Atlanta, or any of the others, or Charlie Manson. See, I don't comment about other cases for the simple fact is that I wasn't there.
Do you feel somewhat of a kinship with some of these people?
God, I hate that when they put me in the same club with them.
That's precisely the club that John Gacy belongs in. And the pain felt by Dahmer's victims is still felt 13 years later by the families of Gacy's victims.
When you have a child taken out of your life, it is like a little piece is taken out of your heart. You can never forget it. Everything keeps revolving back to the day when he did this or he did that, and we reminisce.
Dolores Nieder, courageous mother, still in the same house on the northwest side of Chicago. 13 years remembering Johnny, who was a Marine and then studying to be an accountant. Like others, he went to Gacy's house for a job and never came back. About which John Gacy expresses no remorse whatever. On the contrary, he says he's a victim for being found guilty, the 34th victim, and he says the families are victims because they don't know who the real killer is.
I'm not only the victim here. I may be the 34th victim, but there are other victims to this crime, and that is the family. Because if I know that I didn't commit the crime, then I have been given the injustice, and so has the families. And nobody gives a damn about the families.
As though he cares, which clearly he does not. And when the families insist that John Gacy pay for his crimes with his life, His real feelings come out.
That one mother that gets on television all the time who thinks I should be given 33 injections, I think she ought to take 33 Valiums and go lay down. She goes on Geraldo show and all these other shows talking about, I think it's Maori, I think is the name. Her Marine son. Her Marine son, if her Marine son was so great, what the hell did he run away from home 12 times?
Not enough for him to be murdered.
I know that.
He's also lying. Johnny was not a runaway. And as to Gacy's snide remark about the Valium?
Well, Walter, it's hard for me to comprehend that Gacy has the right to say something like that about me because of the fact of what he did. What right has he to
say anything about you at all?
Right. Right.
John Gacy now faces death by lethal injection. Tomorrow night we'll hear what he has to say about that. In fact, Gacy's now talking about many things. He says, for example, that there were accomplices in his murders.
Had this case properly been investigated, I think you would have there should have been 4 indictments. A minimum of 4 indictments. And I say that sincerely.
And he names names tomorrow.
Tonight in News Extra, we've heard an extraordinary story told by a desperate man. John Wayne Gacy is trying to rewrite history and retry his case. Tonight, Gacy's story focuses on the house on Summerdale. For years, it was his home. As Channel 2's Walter Jacobson is here to tell us, it is the center of Gacy's case and all of his alibis. Walter?
Linda, as you know, it was the house on Summerdale that he buried 26 of the 33 bodies. It was his home and his office as well. And he now says there was so much going on inside that house that any number of people could have been involved.
There's a misconception of what the house on Summerdale is. It's not a house where you work 9 to 5 and come home, and it's like a house where you live in. The living room was the private office section. One of the bedrooms was a terrarium. The kitchen was more like a fast food kitchen.
He's painting a picture of a busy place, but conveniently omitting the crawl space, which he divided into plots like a cemetery, numbers 1 through 26, 6 feet by about 3 feet, and 1.5 feet deep. That was under the house. Up above 8213 West Summerdale was not only where Gacy lived, as he says, but headquarters for his company, PDM Construction, and a flop house for PDM employees, upon whom Gacy is now laying the blame for the murders.
We have always contended there's others involved. At the time of my arrest, there was 4 other suspects. 3 of the suspects that we knew that they knew then was Michael Rossi, David Cram, and Philip Paskey. All employees of PDM Contractors, all with keys to the house on Summerdale.
And they had friends, Gacy says, and friends of friends, as he weaves for me an alibi. There was Michael Rossi, for one, who worked for PDM and actually lived there during the time of the murders. Gacy and Rossi socialized in the house with Johnny Zick, victim number 3, the night he was murdered.
I met him the night he was killed because I met him with Michael Rossi. I had a drink with the 2 of them, and then I left. And when I next seen the individual, he was dead.
Where did you see
him? Why
him?
didn't I say something about it? Because it wasn't my business, and I stayed out of other people's business.
Where did you see him dead?
In the house on Summerdale.
And did Rossi tell you who had killed him?
No, Rossi didn't say nothing. Rossi was sleeping on a couch. I just left.
And how did he get buried? Do you know?
He was buried in the crawl space. When I come back, he wasn't there. So, Walter, that's your guess as to who put him in the ground in that.
Gacy finds a corpse in his living room and doesn't say anything because it's not his business? Well, if you don't believe that, he has another story about being so high on drugs, he didn't know what he was doing.
No, I started back in 1984. I started taking 10 milligram of Valium, and by the time 1978 came around, I was doing 130 milligram of Valium. But then I was moving 80 jobs a year, and I was working 16 and 18-hour days, and I just had to have something to take the pressure off.
So the next thing people wonder is what about the smell in the house of decomposing bodies? Gacy has a lasso-opso story for that.
When I was arrested, they claimed, well, there was a putrefied odor in the house. And I contend that was a lot of hogwash, too, because one Officer Schultz claims on the 18th or on the 19th that as he came into the house, we had come into the house and my little lasso-opso was in the house. And of course, he had been locked in the kitchen, you know, all day. Well, the little puppy, he fiddles, see, and while he's fiddling and while he is doing his business on the paper and that, you can imagine what it smells like if you go into a closed room. And when the heat came on, as soon as the heat came on, it'd give you, you know, that strong feces odor.
Or if not the dog, maybe just the house itself. How about the sump pump?
You know, I found it as odd when we bought the house that a house with a crawl space would need a sump pump. But then I learned the first time it rained that this ground gets wet under there, and the crawl space actually floods up to a foot deep in water. And then as it recedes, it puts out a musty odor. There was always a musty odor in that house.
These excuses, and the ones we've heard all week, are the bases for Gacy's appeals, which are expected to go on for another 2 years, maybe 3, before his death sentence is carried out. What have 13 years of thinking about that done to John Gacy? Nothing, he says. Nothing at all.
I'm just as lovable and jokeable as I was back then. You know, I don't sit around worrying about the death penalty or things like that, no.
How could you not?
If you believe you've lived your life the right way, then you do not have nothing to fear, in my case.
You're not worried about facing God?
No. I'm fairly comfortable with him. I've been at the Catholic services. I'm the server for the priest for the last 10 years. I have no qualms about doing that. I've had confession. I have communion. And I am at peace with myself.
That's what he says, that he's at peace with himself. But he seemed to me, to be highly agitated and very frightened about death. He says he's religious, so how could he not be afraid of death, or what'll happen to him after death? Clearly, John Gacy's afraid enough to be doing whatever he can to avoid his execution, making up new excuses, denying his involvement, trying now to involve others, anything to open his case and prolong his life. But, given the facts of the case, no matter what he does, it won't be enough. And then, Bill?
Walter, thank you.
Very interesting.
There are clowns, forest scenes and seascapes, Disney characters and skulls. Whimsical, peaceful, childlike, and gruesome. All the work of one man, John Wayne Gacy. The artwork is on exhibition and for sale here at the Tattoo Gallery in Beverly Hills, and all of the works are privately owned. But to some, the art may not be considered worth the price tag.
John's a self-taught artist, so I guess his style could be described as unsophisticated or naive. I think a lot of people are disappointed when they see John's work for the first time and they realize that he's not Modigliani. But it's quite possible that they're missing the point. There's more to John Gacy than the media has presented.
There is a term for this work. It's called art brut. Artwork done by the criminally insane or incarcerated. And in Gacy's case, he's blurred the line even further by painting those who have gone before him. Hitler and Dillinger, to name just two.
He certainly would not want to be associated with those criminals. That would be guilt by association. Of course, John proclaims he's innocent. He's giving the public what they want.
And even while this work is on exhibition, the state of Illinois is attempting to sue Gacy for any profit he made on his art to pay for his years of incarceration. He's slated to be executed in just a few months. Who knows what that will do to these prices? We Americans do seem to have a fascination with the criminal mind. Axl Rose recently recorded a Charlie Manson song, and Night Stalker Richard Ramirez is currently in negotiations for his art.
Perhaps there's something to learn from his art, as in all art. He did all of these while he was in prison.
The artworks of serial killer John Wayne Gacy are about to become the hottest items in a bizarre collection.
My personal favorites are these 4 bird pictures he did, which are actually quite good.
From quite good to a little scary, Gacy's work paints a picture. Birds and the happy self-portrait as Pogo the Clown, contrasted by dark skulls and a simple profile of Hitler. These paintings fit right in with Neil Trickle's unusual keepsakes.
During Prohibition is a 1921 Thompson submachine gun.
Tommy guns alongside photos of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And just for an extra chill, how about an actual plaster cast of John Dillinger's face?
Which was cast in the Cook County morgue in 1934 after the shooting. The paper here shows it actually being made.
Trickle traces his interest in these items to old gangster movies. He also works in pathology. With an interest in crime and violent death, the most famous crime ever is a natural fit. He has one of the few copies of a photo taken by Dallas Police Chief Jess Curry. He claims an extra bullet fragment shown in the photo debunks the magic bullet theory in President Kennedy's death.
With this extra piece of metal, there is your fourth shot and your second rifle.
He knows his collection is unusual, but says it's not ghoulish. As for the Gacy photos that stand to jump in value once he's executed, Trickle says they're like any other celebrity collectible.
I don't feel like I'm an accomplice, no. He's an internationally known figure, just like anyone else would be. And these were works that I was able to acquire that were his.
Despite his financial interests, Trickle's feelings about Gacy haven't changed.
The sooner they get rid of him, the better, yeah.
Dave Hasselt reporting.
For 14 years, serial killer John Wayne Gacy has been living on appeals. Illinois' Attorney General set up this legal war room to handle today's two final appeals filed by Gacy's lawyers.
He won't beg for his life.
You can exhaust all the legal remedies possible, but no clemency pleas.
Right.
The scene in 1978 was gruesome. Body after body found buried beneath Gacy's suburban Chicago home. All young men aged 14 to 21. In the end, Gacy, a successful businessman who often dressed as a clown to entertain children, would be convicted of 33 deaths. In a telephone interview last week, Gacy claims he did not receive a fair trial.
For 14 years, I've been fighting the same battle. All I want is the truth to be learned, that I did not commit all the crimes.
There were rallies today by those who favor capital punishment.
John Wayne Gacy, it's time for you to die!
And those who don't.
We're not civilized. We're a violent, terrible country that does not respect life, and so we set a bad example.
Earlier today, a helicopter transferred Gacy to Stateville Prison. There, at 1 minute after midnight, 28 witnesses will watch as a lethal injection cuts off his breathing and stops his heart. Gacy's lawyers argue the process is cruel and unusual punishment. The families of Gacy's victims call it justice.
Talk about inhumane. Did Gacy think of anything being humane when he tortured and killed our boys? No.
Since 1980, the state has spent $164,000 on Gacy's incarceration. More than 40 judges have heard his many appeals. He hasn't been successful yet. If he fails again, he'll be the second inmate executed since Illinois reinstated the death penalty 17 years ago. Dawn Fratangelo, NBC News, Joliet, Illinois.
It was 4 years ago the doors to the execution chamber were last opened. There, the first person, Charles Walker, died under the reenacted death penalty statute in Illinois. Now the room is quiet and musty, awaiting the most infamous serial killer in U.S. history. John Wayne Gacy is convicted of murder in the deaths of 33 young men and boys. He's scheduled to die here by lethal injection. Family members of the victims say after 14 years of waiting, they're relieved. They only wish they could have put this behind them sooner.
For my mother, her goal in life was to see him die. That was her main goal. I want to see him suffer like he made my son suffer. And it's really sad that she isn't seeing his final demise.
Eugenia's brother Gregory was just 17 years old when he went to work for John Gacy. Soon after, he disappeared.
I know that my brother did, help him around his house, but it came out in the trial that the kids were digging their own graves.
Eugenia's mother even called Gacy to ask where her son was. The reply? Many young people run away. Perhaps he has too. But Gregory Godzik had not run away. He had become one of Gacy's victims, one of dozens who fell prey to his charm, a mistake that proved fatal. Now, after 7 appeals and a plea for stay of execution, Gacy is finally scheduled to die for his crimes. On May 10th, John Wayne Gacy will be wheeled into this room, strapped onto this gurney, and hooked into a saline IV. Moments later, 2 men behind that window will press a button. One, no one knows which, releasing a lethal dose of drugs, first to put Gacy to sleep, then to stop his breathing, and finally stopping his heart, putting John Wayne Gacy to death.
To think of the things that he did to 33 people, it's not hard enough. He's not suffering enough. Now, maybe if he got 33 injections, 33 slashes or whips or something. There has, I don't know, I just think it's an easy way out.
The procedure follows the law strictly, paying close attention to humane treatment of the inmate. But critics charge whether he feels pain or not isn't the issue.
If the killing of John Gacy could bring back any one of his 33 victims, I would say have at him. If you could convince me that the killing of John Gacy would mean that no one in the future would die by a violent death, I would say he's worth the sacrifice. But that's magical thinking.
Those who lost loved ones in Gacy's killing rampage say if his death prevents even one other person from committing murder, the capital punishment is worth it.
I don't think you guys would be able to print them.
Have you given
I may not say nothing.
Have you given some thought to what you might want to say, your last words?
You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. I will be at peace. But in the end, the families will have not gotten justice. It may take away some of the pain that you're executing me, but you will not have served those families properly.
John Gacy denies killing all those young men and boys. Whether he denies killing all of them or just some of them isn't clear. But it is clear he admits some involvement in some murders.
If you would have given me a natural life sentence, you would have never heard from me all these years. And it would have cost you not even a tenth of what it's cost in the state of Illinois.
He's talking about millions of dollars spent for his lawyers and the state's for the trials and appeals versus the hundreds of thousands to simply lock him away for the rest of his life. After all, he says, he's really not a bad person.
I'm an easygoing, fair-minded guy, treats people just like they treat me.
His lawyers say he's mentally ill and getting worse. Gacy says he's calm and ready for whatever comes next.
Would you have rather been executed 14 years ago rather than spend these 14 years like you have?
What, like a caged animal? All I've done is fight.
Very few people have had to really face
Every morning
death.
when you wake up, do you think about dying?
No, but I don't know for sure that I'm going to die at 12:01 a.m. the next day.
Okay, well, the thing of it is that if you're at peace with your God, whatever he is, if you're at peace with your God, and if you and God know the truth, you have nothing to fear but fear itself.
John, how can you be at peace with God knowing that you were in some way involved with a number of murders?
All right, I don't want to, John, don't answer that.
That was lawyer Karen Conti, one of those fighting to stay the execution. She monitored our interview, breaking in several times with legal advice, like when Gacy seemed to imply he had more information for authorities.
If you're going to execute me, you're only going to execute my body. You're never going to change my mind. If you're looking for an 11th hour change of the story, forget it, because it's not with me.
Is there anything else? Is there anything else that you have to say that we?
Knowing what I know.
Sorry?
I will go to my death knowing what I know.
And are those things that you haven't told us?
John, don't answer that.
No, you can answer this one, Karen, because what he's trying to do is twist it into saying that there was more, and that we're not talking about that.
Let's get off that.
We just haven't hit the area. They don't want to deal with the facts.
Jay Levine for CBS News, Chicago.
Prison authorities in Illinois are preparing to execute one of America's most notorious serial killers. John Wayne Gacy is scheduled to die by lethal injection early Tuesday morning after a legal battle that has gone on for years. More now from Frank Courier.
It was 1978 when the world first saw the horrifying images of body bags being pulled from John Wayne Gacy's house near Chicago, and of Gacy, later convicted in the torture murders of 33 young men and boys and condemned to die.
Nothing is going to stop this execution from happening. It's gotta happen.
After 14 years on death row in an Illinois prison, fighting to overturn his sentence, Gacy's time is running out. His lawyers are scrambling to block Tuesday's scheduled execution.
Mr. Gacy is, unfortunately, the person that everybody holds up to support the idea that capital punishment is right and that it works and that it's just.
But prosecutors say he's exhausted his options.
I don't want to see any last-minute delays. The case has been pending for 14 years. His lawyers had an obligation sometime in the last 14 years to bring up whatever they're trying to bring up today.
Most Chicagoans agree and are fed up with paying millions of tax dollars to keep a confessed serial killer alive.
We wasted enough money on him already.
He just doesn't have a purpose on this planet.
Not surprisingly, even activists admit that Gacy may be the perfect argument for capital punishment, but they want to keep him alive, saying that any execution sends out the wrong message.
The unavoidable truth is that the death penalty makes premeditated killers of us all. We become the very thing that we condemn.
Still, for the victims' families, it'll be justice served when, barring any last-minute reprieve, Gacy dies by lethal injection in a small execution chamber at Stateville Penitentiary. Frank Courier, CBS News, Joliet, Illinois.
Most notorious serial killers is dead. John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection early this morning at the state prison in Joliet, Illinois. Gacy had spent more than 14 years on Illinois' death row after being convicted of the brutal murders of 33 young men and boys. Most were found buried beneath his home in suburban Chicago. President Clinton says powerful forces are trying to...
Could you identify yourself?
Hi, I'm Stuart Warren from the Herald News in Joliet.
Reporter?
I'm a reporter. I'm the police reporter, the paper. I don't know what I can tell you. STEWARREN. It's very unusual for me to be on this side.
Well, there's a debate going on whether he made...
We sat in there for an awfully long time. The man was right in front of us. Didn't look at us. Didn't seem to. No, a lot of, kind of like a Twilight Zone episode. There were all these sort of shadowy things going on, and it was very creepy, but it wasn't like you saw anything bad happen. So, but it was certainly odd. So.
Describe the scene for us, please.
Golly, I felt like I was back in grade school. You know, you're in one of those rooms that's made out of old tile and brick, and then there's a window, and he was just right in there in a blue work shirt, blue work pants, hair come back. I couldn't hear his last statement, though we were told to be something along the lines of "kiss my ass." So.
Who told you that?
Actually, Nick Howell did. He's the Department of Corrections spokesman. So.
When they pulled the curtain, what did you think?
I thought I wanted to go home and have a drink. It's time to go.
No, I mean when they pulled the curtain, when
they opened it up.
When there's a problem halfway through and they had to shut the curtain and reopen.
I don't know that that was a problem. I assumed that by then that he was dead and they were unhooking him or something. I don't know. I just thought it was part of the procedure. They never said anything. So I don't know. Can I tell you guys anything else?
Sure.
Sure.
Just one other thing. You asked about the victims' families. There were 23 in attendance nearby. None of them have accepted our offer to come on down here and talk to you.
23 people?
23.
Can you tell us a little bit more about where they were and what they did while this
They were
was all happening?
They were not behind the prison walls. They were in an area adjacent to the prison. In a separate area. They were provided cookies and soft drinks and stuff like that, and staff support in the form of counselors in the event that they had any emotional problems.
Did that happen? Did that happen?
I can't. I don't know.
Is there an on time?
I don't know. That's up to the coroner.
Were there any emotional reactions, Nick, on the part of any of the family members?
I don't know that. You'd have to ask them. They don't want to, no, I was not there. I didn't do it. No, they didn't go in. The only people that went into the execution were the media people and the official witnesses and those other people. There were no family members.
They were in a separate room away from this execution altogether?
Yes, they were not in the prison proper.
But did any of them request to see a counselor?
I don't know that.
You don't know?
You'd have to talk to them.
They did not witness the actual event?
Mr. Gacy's body is in the possession of the Will County coroner.
They didn't witness the actual event?
No, they did not. They were in the vicinity of the prison.
So what happens to the body now?
It's up to the coroner. It goes to the coroner. Mr. Gacy told me what he wanted for to happen to his body, and he asked me not to tell you. I'm going to honor his last wish to me. Thank you. Do you have any other questions of myself or the director?
Were the family people on the prison grounds or here?
They were on the prison grounds.
Nick, were his last words to kiss my ass?
No, they were not. They were not. He alluded to, basically, as I had explained to you earlier, that killing him would not bring back the victims.
Who exactly did he provide the statement to? Director Peters?
Director Peters and the warden were there.
Teheda, T as in Tom, E-J, E-D-A, from United Press International.
Sorry, T-E-J.
E-D-A, from UPI. Excuse me? Yes.
They said they just started late. Just describe the scene.
Phone with the phone.
Okay. At about
You with the phone.
okay, at about 12:30, we're taken in there. After about a couple minutes, lights go out, curtain opens. We see John Gacy strapped to the gurney. They start the drugs. They start the process, and we could see a little jerk of the head and a very loud snort. In fact, yes. In fact, it was about the only reaction out of him, because he stared straight at that ceiling the entire time, straight at the fan that was above him. Yes, for about 2-3 minutes, then they closed. His belly was heaving rather heavily, the normal breathing. We could see that for about a good 5-6 minutes, and then it stopped. And after about a minute, they closed the curtain. And that curtain remained closed for about 10 minutes. That's my guess, about 10 minutes. Reopened. I almost saw what appeared to be like a little twitch of the arm. Just a little twitch. In fact, my initial reaction was that I imagined it. But curtain remained open for about 3-4 minutes. They continued the process. Then they closed curtain, turned on lights, and about a minute later we are told we were given the pronouncement time.
How long were his eyes open after the process began?
My guess would be about 2 to 3 minutes. I should have been paying more attention to my watch. I was not.
What arm is
His right arm at about just above the elbow.
Greg, did you hear that snort? Did you hear it?
Yes, we could hear that very loud and clear through the wall, through the glass window.
It's closed after that, right?
Yes.
Greg, was there anything that you would describe as suffering or undue?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Would you describe what went on, and you described these body behaviors and whatnot, as suffering or natural body processes going through death?
With the exception of that snort, no. It was like I watched a man go to sleep. Part of me thinks he's still asleep. It's just like after a while the breathing stopped and curtain closed. Just it's just nothing in the way of any kind of violent reaction at all. In fact, I was expecting more of a reaction than what actually came.
Your name, please, first.
My name's Tim Nieder. I'm
Would you spell it for us, please, sir?
Nieder, N-I-E-D-E-R. I'm the brother of John Mowry, and there were about 23 of the family members of the victims that we were a little bit amazed. The reason we came over here was several of us had asked to be witnesses to the execution because we just felt it was something we needed to experience to be at peace with the whole situation. We were given a runaround and told that there were only going to be about 18 people in at the execution. Then we were in a small room in the basement of one of the buildings here watching your newscast on about a 9-inch television. We weren't at all notified what was going on throughout the whole episode, and we were all a little bit distraught about that. And then we had heard through your broadcast after the execution was completed that there were approximately 40 to 45 people in witnessing the execution. And the whole thing that we've been here about is to try and stress victims' rights and the families of the victims. And we feel that one of our rights were stripped by not allowing us to be there at the end. Not to be morbid or anything, it was just something that was a matter of closure for us and our families. Vito has been through quite a bit trying to get to witness the execution as I have. I mean, this has been 14 years in the making, where it's a constant reminder when we see Mr. Gacy on the news. My mother has been very cooperative with all of you, I'm just glad that finally a little justice was done in this matter.
What? Peace.
That's all I have to say.
It seems you're even more frustrated, though, in some sense than you were when you got here? Or you feel more relief now that it's over?
It's somewhat a mixed emotion for me. I thought we were going to be somewhere where we could, where we were informed. As far as I'm concerned, we were in a basement of one of the holding facilities, and we were never informed. We had to watch the television. I could have stayed at my house and watched on the news. I mean, we were victims here too, and we just wanted to come here to represent my brother, who is no longer here. And I'm sorry, but the justice system of this country just does not work. It doesn't consider us at all.
Mr. Newz, the explanation that the spokesman for the department offered was that they didn't want to mix the victims' relatives with the relatives of Gacy because there could be potential problems. Do you see
Listen, I recognize John Gacy's relatives as family members too that are victims of this all. They didn't know what he was doing, obviously, or I would hope that they didn't know. And they're a victim just as I'm a victim. And I would have had no ill feelings towards his family members. I have ill feelings toward John Gacy, not his family members, and there would have been no fighting or arguing amongst us. We were all very cordial. We were just upset the way we were treated. And then to find through your coverage that there were 41 people and friends of the warden and friends of the governor, while we pleaded to be a part of that, it just isn't right. Things have to change in the system. It took 14 years in the making for this to come to an end, and it isn't right. This should have happened a long time ago.
Do you feel cheated? Do you feel like it wasn't fulfilling for you? Do you feel empty now?
Cheated is not, I feel cheated that I no longer have a brother. That's where I feel cheated. Mr. Gacy cheated me and my family and all of these families behind me. I don't feel cheated that I didn't get to, I feel cheated that I wasn't told the truth the whole time. None of us were told the truth. And that's how we feel cheated. I feel like justice has finally been served, but it's been a long time in the making. And
What you were told the truth. Were you told that you might be able to go?
no, we were told from the very onset that we wouldn't be able to go because there's going to be 6 professional witnesses and then only people that had to be there from the state and government. We weren't told, we were told 8, Vito?
I was told 12 media personnel and 6 professional witnesses and 1 or 2 prison officials. Did the state senator from Joliet have more of an interest in witnessing this than you did? If he was there, yes. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the family should have been the first one to have their say-so. And as usual, it seems like the family victims were the last ones to be thought of. Vito, what's your last name? Mazzara.
Based on what you had happened,
M-A-Z-Z-A-R-A.
any work of the people who were victims trying to change state laws so that victims' families can go in and witness executions, or is this the end of it here?
I would have been satisfied with 1 or 2, and that's what I've been saying for over a month, pleading with the governor's office and Department of Corrections, and they told me there wasn't enough room. Was your brother a victim? Yes, he was. What was his name? James. Yes. Vito, what about your reaction to Gacy's execution in general terms? I mean, do you feel better this morning than you did yesterday? I feel justice has been served. Just like Tim said, I'm glad it's over. It was a long, drawn-out, way overdue process that has to be shortened. Were you told about what his last statement was? What was your opinion about that?
We were told nothing.
We were really told very little. His last statement was that he felt he was innocent. He was a victim of all this. That's something he's been saying for 15 years. That's basically what I expected him to say.
Did somebody finally come in from the department and inform you that he had that he was dead, or how did it finally end up?
A call came in. A call came in.
So one of the people that was sitting in there watching TV with us. 12:58.
Another corrections official was in the room with you?
Yes.
A guard.
Okay.
So told by a phone call come from? We don't know.
And what time was that at?
Right around, 1 o'clock.
What time did you come in today?
I've been here, everybody came in different times, starting at like 8 o'clock. I think the first family was there at like 8.
Did you have any counseling available to you there?
Not that I know of, no.
Did they make any food available to you? Or anything?
Yeah, it looked like
Twinkies and orange juice.
Yeah, and yesterday's ham.
Were there any parents of the victims there? Or?
Yes.
You know about how many?
I don't know. There were two.
2 parents?
Yes. 3.
Was it a pretty emotional scene in the room? I mean,
No, it really wasn't. Yeah, we were talking. We were, sharing our grief, I guess. And it held over well.
I think the execution had occurred at 12:01.
Yeah, that's the impression we were under.
And how long did you have that belief that he died at 12:01?
We actually, once it started getting towards 12:30, we were wondering. We asked the guard to place a call, and someone had called at like 12:58.
Can you describe your disappointment that John Gacy never fully confessed, never told you any details about the last hours of his brother?
It's
a moot point, really.
Yeah.
That's something that we weren't here to hear him say that it was guilty. We knew that he was guilty. We were just here to represent our families and finally have a little closure to this whole thing, and we wanted to witness it to know that it was over. Right now we know barely much more than when we came here. We were in a little room watching a little TV with very little support from the Department of Corrections or the state, and very little information was given to us at all. The most information we got was on your news reports on various channels at 1 in the morning.
Tim, are you happy that you came then, or do you regret being here?
Yeah, it's a 9-inch color TV.
If anything happens in the future where something is speeded up or some the victims' families have a little bit more support, or a little bit more involvement, or their wishes are granted, then I'm happy I was here.
Plastic chairs.
Otherwise, I don't have any feelings about today at all.
What about for your own emotions?
No, none whatsoever. A dingy basement where, it looked like yesterday's food.
I'm glad it's over.
Is anybody else here?
John Wayne Gacy has been executed. He died early this morning of a lethal injection in an Illinois prison. Here's ABC's Aaron Hayes.
Hundreds had waited outside to hear that John Gacy had finally died. After last words, he called his execution an injustice. Gacy was given a fatal injection of chemicals.
Like he was gasping or choking or something, and then after that was pretty much nothing.
In the execution chamber, an IV was placed in Gacy's arm. 3 chemicals were to flow through, one to knock him unconscious, another to stop his breathing, and a final one to stop his heart. But there was a problem. The killing chemicals got clogged.
The second chemical didn't completely go in the first instance because there was a gelling or clogging in the line.
It took 18 minutes for Gacy to die, about 4 times longer than expected, and his attorneys insist that may have meant excruciating suffering for Gacy.
No one deserves to suffer. The particular method that they're using here is inhumane.
Gacy's prosecutor, though, said he had little sympathy for someone who had killed and tortured 33 young men.
He got a much easier death than any of his victims. In my opinion, he got an easier death than he deserved.
This is not the first time an execution has gone awry in this country. In Texas, injection lines leaked, spraying chemicals at witnesses. Florida, flames shot out of one man's head as he died in the electric chair. Alabama, an electric chair malfunctioned, requiring 2 tries to bring death. Opponents of the death penalty say executions are at times torture, and that, no matter the crimes of the individual, is wrong. The state of Illinois plans a review of its lethal injection procedures. Thus far, no more executions have been scheduled here. Aaron Hayes, ABC News, Chicago.
No evidence that serial killer John Wayne Gacy buried bodies of his victims in the backyard of his mother's apartment building. Holes were dug in the ground Monday after a former Chicago detective said that he had seen Gacy near the building with a shovel. Gacy was executed in May of 1994 for killing 33 young men and boys. He had told police he killed 45 young men, and the other 12 victims, the reported victims, have never been found. Today in Russia,
Buried in
political
his crawl space, and nobody really believed him.
33 in total, young men between the ages of 14 and 22, lured into his home, sexually assaulted, and murdered. Gacy, who sometimes worked as a volunteer clown, was convicted and eventually executed by lethal injection, but a mystery remained. 8 unidentified victims. Now, more than 30 years later, with modern technology at his disposal, Chicago Sheriff Tom Dart wants to know who they were.
Now, through DNA, families that had no hope of having a match now have the absolute hope. We can be definitive in saying this is or is not your loved one.
So the police dug up the 8 sets of remains and sent them to this lab at the University of North Texas for DNA analysis. To find possible matches, police have opened a hotline and are asking families like the Bodians for DNA samples. 22-year-old Edward went missing in 1978.
It's been 33 long years not knowing what happened to my brother. I would like to know one way or the other.
Investigators believe most, if not all, 8 victims will be identified, but they uncovered new leads in this dusty Chicago evidence room. While looking through the boxes, investigators also found plane tickets to at least 10 different states during the same time he was murdering young men here in Chicago. They thought to themselves, if he was murdering them here, what are the chances he wasn't committing the same crimes while he was on the road? At the time, there were no computers or missing people databases, tools investigators have now used to possibly link Gacy to 27 unsolved cases around the country.
We're running out some of these leads right now, and we're just finding some intriguing patterns.
Technology can now answer decades-old questions about one of the most monstrous crimes in U.S. history. And, chillingly, it may be raising some new ones. Stephanie Gosk, NBC News, Chicago.
A collection any artist in high school could pull off. A dark landscape, a portrait of Elvis, and a scene with 7 dwarfs. But this is the work of John Wayne Gacy, an evil man who buried more than 25 of his victims in the crawl space of his own house.
Well, I think like almost anyone would be pretty creeped out by it.
Ann Mulford is the board president of the Contemporary Art Center, a nonprofit gallery for contemporary artists. It's one of the many galleries inside downtown's Arts Factory, neighboring where Gacy's art is to be displayed.
I'm just going to be honest and tell you that that's how I feel. I don't really want to see the art.
Arts Factory owner Wesley Miles showed us 5 pieces, including this Pennywise the Clown from Stephen King's It. Gacy used to dress up as a clown for charitable events.
People know Gacy by the clown. They refer to him as the clown serial killer sometimes. And to sell that particular image has got to creep a lot of people out.
I've seen a lot of art that's creeped a lot of people out.
The 74 pieces in the full collection could sell anywhere from $1,600 a piece to $15,000. And Miles says all of it will be divided among charities.
This painting of notorious bank robber John Dillinger is actually being donated to the mayor and his mob museum.
More people were killed by the mob than by Gacy. But yet we have several mob museums to glorify.
Investigators, as you recall, found 33 victims of serial killer John Gacy, most buried under the crawl space in his Des Plaines area home back in 1978 in December. Sheriff Dart said that victim number 19 now has a name. Bill Bundy was 19 years old when he went missing in October of 1976. He was a student at Senn High School. His sister says she has long suspected he was one of John Gacy's victims, but his dental records had been destroyed by his dentist who had retired at that point. So there was no way to identify him until the sheriff and the University of North Texas began DNA testing.
Today's a terribly sad day for my family, especially my brother and I. But it is also a day that provides closure. For over 30 years, our family has dealt with unanswered questions regarding Bill. But now with technology and the efforts of Sheriff Tom Dart and his detective, Jason Moran, those questions are answered.
Mr. Bundy's parents both passed away within the last decade. Now, the results that came back from the University of North Texas also included the results from 4 other families. And Sheriff Dart says those 4 have all been excluded as possible victims of John Gacy, so they do not have closure. There are still as many as a dozen other samples that have been submitted. The sheriff is hoping that there will be more matches from those samples.
Tonight for the family of a teenager who ran away more than 40 years ago. Today, Cook County Sheriff's officers identified James Byron Hawkinson as a victim of notorious serial killer John Wayne Gacy. NBC5 investigates. Chris Coffey's on the story. He's live in our newsroom with details. Chris?
Well, Alice and the family had a hunch for decades and finally learned what happened.
Closure tonight for the family of a teenager who ran away more than 40 years ago. Today, Cook County Sheriff's officers identified James Byron Hawkinson as a victim of notorious serial killer John Wayne Gacy. NBC5 investigates. Chris Coffey's on the story. He's live in our newsroom with details. Chris?
Well, Alice and the family had a hunch for decades and finally learned what happened to their brother just this week. With Hawkinson's discovery, there are now 6 Gacy victims who still need to be identified. The sheriff says he's narrowed the time frame of the murders and has the technology to solve the mysteries, but he still needs more families to step forward. Jimmy Hawkinson was just 16 when he left Minnesota, arrived in Chicago, and disappeared. Now, through DNA testing, investigators have identified his remains and notified the family.
It's beyond heartbreaking when you're explaining to them that their worst possible horrors were actually, unfortunately, true.
The Cook County Sheriff can now say Hawkinson was one of the bodies pulled from killer John Wayne Gacy's crawl space in 1978.
He was killing so many people that he was burying people on top of each other. And so in this situation, Jimmy's remains were found immediately underneath another young man's remains named Rick Johnston.
Hawkinson's mother contacted authorities in the late 70s concerned that her son may be a victim. However, a match could not be made then. But earlier this year, Hawkinson's nephew reached out to the sheriff's office. Investigators compared DNA samples from the family with Jimmy's remains and also considered the timeline based on Johnston's murder.
And there was an immediate hit, which was able to lead us to identifying Jimmy.
It's just awful that this is the way he died.
Hawkinson's sister says she can finally have some closure, but she never got to know the man he could have become because of Gacy.
That awful man took his life away, and he didn't have a chance to do all the fun things that you do in life.
Now, Hawkinson's family plans to come to Chicago in the near future to put his name on his grave here. And the sheriff is also encouraging more people to offer DNA samples so that investigators can close out the 6 remaining Gacy victims. Chris Coffey, NBC5 News.
As the sister said, it is just awful. Thank you, Chris.